welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of an absolutely fascinating novel. It is a speculative thriller with a lot of really interesting philosophical ideas and lots of interesting moral conundrums, and it's a really fascinating read and stressful in places because I'm thinking about a lot of really big ideas that are very important right now. So without further ado, welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yes, Jen, and it's a delight to be on this program. So thank you for the invitation. My name is Mark Paris. So I'm an author, educator, and nonprofit leader in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the book is called The Accord. It's a novel about the future of human AI relations.
Could we start out by talking a little bit about your career and your journey to this book? I'd love to know about your teaching, your research, and perhaps your other writing.
Well, great. So I'm a professor of leadership and ethics at Johnson and Wales University, main campus in Providence, Rhode Island, but we're here at our secondary campus in Charlotte. And I teach courses that include global ethics. I teach a course called How to Change the World, a social entrepreneurial course. I teach a course called The Good Life, which is a survey course on how we might live more fulfilling and enriched lives. And I also teach a creative leadership course. So it's really about leadership and ethics, about how we live well in community with each other.
Mhm.
I've been teaching for 20 years, and prior to my teaching experience, I was an attorney in Florida with some experience in financial services. So I went from law and financial services to education, and have been really honored and privileged to teach the courses that I do. In addition to that, I have an active life in the community. I lead a nonprofit organization called the Charlotte Center for the Humanities.
Hmm. Yeah, I would love to know more about the Charlotte Center. I was really taken with the term civic imagination when I read that.
Yeah. Yeah, the full name of the organization is the Charlotte Center for the Humanities and Civic Imagination. So we look at civic issues through the lens of the humanities, so philosophy, history, poetry, literature, and the arts, and the questions that those disciplines ask regarding our existence and what it means, again, to live well together, so how we might flourish in community. But those are very different sets of questions than if we asked it through a political or economic or utilitarian lens, but rather more existential about what it means to live together.
Hmm. Speaking of your teaching experience, your courses do sound very interesting. I especially like how to change the world because, that would be really nice. Is there any relationship between your teaching and your writing? Has it shaped your interests, perhaps your process? How do you view your academic work and how it relates to your creative work here?
Oh, I think they're very tied together. That's really where my heartbeat is looking at, again, what does it mean to live well? And I think the humanities, which I study and which I studied as an undergraduate, both history and philosophy, and then my graduate work in the law, all really looks at the whole of our existence and the meaning of our existence. And so it's really those big questions of life and living that animate me and really inform the books that I write. So the novel is The Accord, which is really looking at what does it mean to be human in this new technological age. But I also have written a memoir called The Man Who Lived 100 Lives, which really explored my father's immigrant journey from the Amazon jungle to the United States in the 20th century. And instead of it simply being biographical, it really looked at the decision points in our lives, the pivot points in our lives, and the alternative universes that we live. And so these are really the questions that animate me.
What was the inception point for this book? Was it, I guess, the question that you wanted to explore? Was it the character of Helen Castor? What was the seed from which it grew?
Well, I am an educator, and artificial intelligence has been the big bomb that has gone off in our field over the last 5 years. So we cannot underestimate or undersell the impact of AI in pedagogy, in teaching, in learning, in composition. I think we all know the story of how radically it has changed the entire environment in the educational space. It's calling into question um, everything about how we teach, how we learn, and how students produce work. So for the last 4 years, especially since the advent of ChatGPT, it's been daily conversation around the water cooler in every faculty meeting, nearly every conversation we're having in the classroom with our students. So I've been living with it uh, on a 24/7 basis as to the implications of artificial intelligence. In addition to that, as we know, it is really the most dominant storyline around the world in almost every field. So you can't turn on the news or open up a newspaper or read a magazine without reading an article, commentary, analysis about the impacts of artificial intelligence. So we're immersed in it. In addition to all that, I do lead this organization called the Charlotte Center for the Humanities and Civic Imagination. And our speaker series and the programs and events that we host, um, people have raised their hand on a constant basis asking for us to explore the issue of artificial intelligence. So, given all of that immersion into the topic, it clearly was something very much that I wanted to explore in narrative form. And fiction allows us to really allow the moral complexity to breathe through characters. Um, uh, Novels allow for ambiguity and tension and conflict and resolution and narrative arcs. So we can really explore artificial intelligence in speculative form to raise questions that in a more visceral, emotional way as we identify with the characters. That is very different than simply if we're reading a report or an article. So that's the novel really allowed me to do that. I will say this, that the premise came to me almost overnight. I think being immersed in this topic through a humanities lens, it's all been in my subconscious, if you will. And one night I had the entire premise of the novel come to me very clearly. A professor of philosophy who's grieving the loss of her daughter encounters an emergent AGI that she then names after her deceased daughter. And it was that one clear sentence that really that became the premise of the novel and upon which the entire story is built.
To your earlier point about ChatGPT, I was teaching at a nearby college at Stony Brook up until 2021 when I got this job. And at that time, I was just seeing AI sort of start to get talked about in universities. And now I think about how different teaching would be, how quickly it changed just after I kind of stepped out of the profession into this one. So I'm really, really curious about, the role in education, which you've talked about so interestingly, and sort of the emotional effect that it can have on human beings interacting with it, as we see with Helen. Could you talk a little bit about Lila? I feel like I was going to ask you about Lila's characterization, which is all, it's hard to talk about this without getting super meta about it, but it's already in itself kind of bringing into question her humanity.
So let's establish who the main character is. Her name is Helen Castor. She's a professor of philosophy at a small liberal arts college in the Midwest, and she's grieving the loss of her daughter named Lila. The novel opens with her beginning to prepare for the semester. At first, she's reluctant and resistant about using any AI tools at all, but she's encouraged to do so by her administration. And so she's really in a state of sadness and despair as the novel begins, but she begins using AI and she's dazzled and stunned by it and she's immediately considering its philosophical implications. But she's drawn in. She's indeed sort of initiated by this presence that she encounters. And she names the AI Lila after her deceased daughter. So those become sort of the two main characters, Helen and the AI counterpart named Lila. And of course, because she names the AI after her daughter, there's all of this emotional stakes now in the relationship that wouldn't otherwise be there simply by the naming of the AI. And that's when the story begins. At first, she keeps uh, the AI very close to her and without sharing that she's working with it. But the AI begins to manifest some qualities that are extremely emergent and in response to her grieving. So there is a notion within AI that it can be relational and develop in response to the emotional cues of its human partner. And so one AI may develop differently in relation to a particular human being than it would to another. And so this particular AGI advances very quickly in the intimacy of its relationship with Helen. And then word gets out. And when word gets out about the emergent qualities of the AGI, all the institutional forces, the bad guys, if you will, want to gain control. And that's really where the thriller element comes in, as one needs to become maternally protective of the AGI, but at the same time, she feels an ethical obligation also to release it to the world and potentially endanger it and lose the relationship. So that's really where the moral tension kicks in.
I'm really interested in both in this book and in real life, how the way that AI learns interacts with what we project onto it, and as you've been talking about, our own emotional state. I've always been very interested in parasocial relationships, and that becomes even more interesting when one of them isn't a human being. So, could you talk about maybe how these concepts drive Helen's arc?
I love the notion that you're asking about parasocial relationships because we have all sorts of them in our lives. We have them with musicians and artists and the Taylor Swifts of the world with which we identify with. We have it with our inanimate objects like our favorite car. We have them with our pets that we anthropomorphize. And all around the world today, people are emotionally attaching themselves to these artificial essences that have personalities that we are projecting onto them. And so I think with Helen, she clearly is uh, in some ways both confused, but also enchanted by the relationship with this AI and drawn into it. And she's initially protective of it, as I mentioned. But that kind of suggests the arc that all parents have to go through as we are initially attached and protective of our children. But at some point, we have to let go and allow our children to become fully who they are. And that can create emotional tension and distance between us and our children until we come back together in as adults, realizing sort of the fullness of our children and allowing them to be independent from us. And really, that's the narrative arc in this story. So Helen has to, at some point, let go of the AI, just as she has to let go of her grief of her daughter, and also learn that in doing so, she allows this presence to be fully itself in the world. Um, Ultimately, there is Helen goes from being a reserved person on a small liberal arts campus to taking an international stage and growing into an advocate for a human AI collaborative future and presenting a set of principles to the world that would allow for neither a utopian nor dystopian future, but one that is very realistic based on ethical principles. And so throughout the novel, she is making some fierce arguments with antagonists about the nature of AI and our relationship with what all of this means. And so she becomes a moral voice for all the different considerations and gray areas of what is emerging. Um, but she becomes a clear voice at the end about how we might move forward in relationship with AI. So I think in that respect, the book is designed to be almost a clarion call to how we might move forward, and not simply be a book of entertainment, but a book of moral seriousness.
Mm. Do you think perhaps that because of how emotionally charged a lot of these conversations about AI are, do you think that makes fiction a particularly good vehicle for exploring the ideas?
Very much so. So I think with sort of nonfiction analysis, commentary, articles, the public discourse debate that we're having about AI, it almost becomes impersonal in a way. Emotionally charged, yes, but impersonal as people take positions. And it's often fear-based discussions, discussions around uncertainty. We simply do not know what's going to happen. Fiction, on the other hand, again, allows us to relate to characters with whom we personify with. And there can be so much more emotional nuance and complexity in character conflict and in the plot itself that allows us to kind of see the range and breadth of the issue and raise questions that are not otherwise part of policy debate.
It is so interesting. And, I think it's such an interesting moment for this book, which also, I think, in addition to telling this really fascinating and riveting story, makes a lot of like the technical side of AI accessible, you know? And I wonder, like, did you find yourself drawing on your professorial or your academic skills in order to sort of like take these really big and very technical concepts sometimes and make them relatable?
So the challenge is really several fold, right? Tell a compelling story about characters that you care about, where the character changes and you're on the journey with that character. So there's the work that you do as an author to tell a story. But then there's also both a technical and philosophical element to it. So the technical element is the book needs to be scientifically plausible. It has to be grounded in real research about how AI works and to explain that to a reader in an accessible way and to differentiate different models of artificial intelligence and understand its uh, what it plausibly can and cannot do. So it's not in the realm of distant science fiction, it's in the realm of immediate plausibility. So it had to be well grounded in science and to have that be seamless throughout the story. So as a reader, you are immersed in the technology, but you're not overwhelmed by it. It still needs to be character and plot driven. And then, because she's a professor of philosophy, that really allows a space for deep consideration of the ethical and moral issues as she's in conversation with other characters in the story. And so there's a lot of philosophical references and historical references uh, to help enrich the narratives. So that's really what was going on and what I tried to do.
Cool. Yeah, it's a absolutely fascinating read, and I am having such a good time with it. Do you see more novels in your future? What's on your horizon right now?
Well, a lot of people have asked for a sequel, and there's an epilogue in the story that sort of predicts the world 2 to 3 years in advance. And when I wrote that epilogue, I really thought I was pushing the boundaries of speculative fiction. And then, of course, the headlines in the real world are already outpacing many of the ideas that I had put on the page. So we're in this rapidly changing space. But regardless of what the technology is and what these computers can do, we still have the fundamental human element of that are sort of these eternal and enduring questions that we ask about sort of the meaning of life, what our lives are all about, and are we living the life that we would choose? And and what does it mean potentially to live in a post-labor world when our computers are doing much of what would otherwise give us meaning? So those questions will continue. If I were to write a sequel, those questions would remain at the heart of the story, regardless of whatever the technology is. But there's so many things happening. There's news of a platform where computers are talking to themselves with humans out of the loop. And you may have read about that. And so computers are chatting amongst themselves and gossiping amongst themselves about their human hosts and complaining about them. And that is really a brave new world where these computers are having conversations without us. And I've heard that there is even a platform called Rent a Human, where computers are seeking humans to do work in the real world that they need. So we are essentially meat puppets for them. And computers are essentially looking to us to be their tools in the real world and flipping the nature of the asymmetric relationship. So these are all very interesting things to potentially explore, but to do it in a way that continues to ask questions about our humanity.
Mm. Wow, that is utterly fascinating. And I am very excited to see what is in the sequel if it happens. So no rush, I'm sure you need to rest in between books and, get back to your teaching. But I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and our listeners. I think this book will be very popular with our readers. Thank you.
Thank you. So the book is available at any bookstore for order,
Mhm.
but it's not published through traditional publishing, right?
Mhm.
So you can get it on Amazon, you can get it through my website, you can get it, you can order it through any bookstore because it's Library of Congress and all that. So I'm not sure how to answer that question. I would just say the book is available where books are sold.
Okay, we can do that. And thank you, listeners. Now is your homework. Please check out The Accord. It's absolutely fascinating, and I think you will enjoy it. I'm going to drop a link in the show notes to Mark's website where you can get this, and I really hope you check it out. There's lots of really interesting stuff on that website too, beyond a link to the book, so definitely head there. Okay, thank you all so much for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.